watched, we're recording this the day before, but everybody will
Welcome
have
to
just
my
seen
channel.
the
Don't forget to
45-minute
subscribe,
Starfield Direct.
like, share.
There's a lot to
Enjoy
get
my
to.
video.
There's a lot going on with this. So I want to just kind of start at the top and we'll kind of work our way down into more nitty-gritty details. This is the first new IP you've done in a couple of decades now. It's been a little while. So totally new thing. It's the biggest exclusive for Microsoft in a long time. And it's certainly the biggest thing Microsoft's put out since they acquired Bethesda. So, pressure. Do you, in all seriousness, like, do you kind of feel any extra pressure compared to any of the other games you've made, or you just kind of focus on what you do? I'm just sort of curious if the stuff that like we talk about in the gaming community is something that goes through your head or gets talked about in the office at all.
Well, clearly, you know, I'm aware of that, you know, everything you said. And compared to our previous games, there's always a lot of attention on what we do. We're very fortunate. But for us, we've put so much into this game. And it is, as you said, you know, our first new IP in over 25 years. It's our first major release in about 8 years.
Yeah.
So for us, we have just put so much into it that we're just doing everything we can to make the best game that we can. Hope that everybody loves it. So we feel we're on the right track, and we're really fortunate, I think, with some of those things you said to get the attention.
Yeah.
And that we know there's a lot of people out there looking forward to it. And we just view our job as, you know, hey, just do the best job we can do, put everything we can into the game, and hope everyone loves it.
Ready to lift off when you are, Captain.
Engines ready.
The Frontier is fueled and ready, Captain.
So I think the last time we talked, or maybe the time before, I gave you a little grief for you Babe Ruthian, you called your shot with 11-11-22 really far in advance. And I think we were having a little fun about that before the delay. So, I mean, it's good. We want a better game. We don't want you to just make the date just for the sake of making the date. So just out of curiosity, like, how has the extra time been spent specifically? Sorry.
Well, look, it's just such a big game. And as you do these things, you know, you do your best as it comes to release dates and projections. But given the scale of it, if one thing is off by a percentage, that can escalate quickly to more time. And we've really spent it most of this year playing the game a ton, over and over, and making sure that it's balanced, it's as fun as possible, honing systems and interface, obviously bug fixing and all of those things, performance, and really getting it where we're really, really sure and solid on what we're putting out there for everybody.
Well, speaking of performance, Xbox gamers went through a little unpleasant surprise with the last big Bethesda exclusive not too long ago with Redfall, and you know that maybe not performing on console on the Series X, kind of how we hoped. So, just I think really all we're looking for is not necessarily everything's got to be 4K 60 or 120 frames, but just kind of. Nobody likes surprises, you know, when it comes to the game that they're going to buy, how it performs, how it feels. Now, your games have always been these just boundary-pushing, envelope-pushing, huge, open, detailed worlds. 30 frames per second on console, traditionally. So I'm going to turn it over for you for a second here. Just lay out, just so that nobody's surprised come September 6th. Sure. What are we looking at play this on a Series X, or even if you want to mention Series S as well? Like, what's the experience going to be, technically speaking?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. You know, I think it'll come as no surprise, given our previous games. What we go for are always these huge open worlds, fully dynamic, hyper detail, where anything can happen. And we do want to do that. You know, it's 4K in the X, it's 1440 on the S. We do lock it at 30. Because we want that fidelity, we want all that stuff. We don't want to sacrifice it. Fortunately, in this one, we've got it running great. It's often running way above that. Sometimes it's 60. But on the consoles, we do lock it because we prefer the consistency.
Yeah. Right?
We are not even thinking about it. And we don't ever want to sacrifice that experience that makes our games feel really, really special. So it feels great. We're really happy with how it feels even in the heat of battle. We need that headroom because, you know, in our games,
speaking of tweaking and optimizing, there were some rumors going around that id Software was helping you guys out with the combat, with tuning combat. I'm just curious, was there any truth to that at all?
They did not help us with the well, first of all, I'd say, being in the company, knowing the folks at id Software for a long time, I'm like a huge Doom fan.
I mean, they know what they're doing. That's why I ask.
They're the absolute best. Doom
awesome.
Eternal is one of my favorite games. And so with Fallout 4, they did give us a few tips on how to handle combat.
Yeah.
But in Starfield, we redid the combat ourselves, and it's really feeling great. But id has helped us really more on the graphics. They've helped us in the graphics side.
Oh, nice.
So we get into motion blur, that it's just how the game feels smooth. Some other things that they do in id Tech that we wanted to bring over into Creation Engine 2, and they helped us do that. And it's great.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a nice neighbor to have down the street.
It is, and I love.
And ask for some milk and sugar, right?
And I'm such a fan of what they do, so being able to get an early look at what they're doing next.
Feel free to talk about that. If you want. All right. So I'm curious. Given you mentioned it's going to be just shy of 8 years between shipping Fallout 4.
Yeah.
And shipping Starfield, which to my knowledge is the longest that you've ever gone between shipping games that you've directed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, obviously we had 76 in between, but it's something that I've directed, yes.
Yeah.
That is the longest.
So, can you I'm just curious about what was your initial vision for Starfield and how that's either stayed true and borne out or evolved over the course of 8 years?
That's a great question. I will say this, that the game sticks to the original vision. That took longer than I wanted. I'd say about halfway through the project, you realize this is why nobody tries to make this game. So it's been when you do these things, you take some risks and you're really ambitious, that can be a very windy path, sometimes, is how I say it. But it is true to the vision we have for our type of role-playing game set in space and where your mind kind of goes. And we want to, as much as possible, say yes to the player. Like, can I do this? Can I do this? Yes. And space is big. So the amount of content that we ended up making to have that really feel authentic to that, that did grow and grow from where we originally started.
Neither one of us is getting younger. We've both been doing our respective things for a while.
Yeah.
So, are you okay with things taking 8 years again in the future, or
not my plan? I don't think you would ever plan for that. Sometimes that's how it ends up, so that that what you're putting on the screen is what you want. But you're right. I'm not getting younger. Sort of start,
how many games?
I probably have
left in you?
Yeah. How many games are ahead of me?
Yeah.
Versus behind me, and so that does start to enter your head.
You know what I hate about these pirates? Completely resistant to my otherwise irresistible charge.
Would you point to any other games as inspiration for Starfield along the way? Not in the literal sense of, I want to do what they did, but in terms of giving the player a feeling that, something that, a game you played that you really wanted to convey. When you first showed me this game a while back, I certainly was reminded of Elder Scrolls and Fallout. There's the DNA is there, but the other, I would say, 2 non-Bethesda games that I got little vibes from were No Man's Sky and Mass Effect.
Well, clearly, those other games that are science fiction, I think you might look at and say, okay, this is science fiction, it's like that. I think the minute to minute, obviously on the ground, it has similarities to Elder Scrolls and Fallout and things that we've made and how it feels in your hands or some certain mechanics. But believe it or not, it's the games that put you in a world, that transport you to a place. So I think it probably also as a flow probably has more of a feeling of like a Red Dead 2, right? Like I'm living the Western fantasy.
Yeah.
So in this, you're living this science fiction explorer fantasy. And sometimes that's being on a barren planet and nothing is going on.
Or an Old West town, like we saw that in the direct.
Right,
Old
or
West inspired.
and all of that. So For me, it's games that where I feel I am rooted in the reality of this universe of the game, and everything else kind of disappears.
There was, as people have now seen, there was a lot in the direct, in the 45 minutes that were covered. A big takeaway for me was that for everything we saw, there was just sort of these hints of constellation, and that seems to be who the main story is going to revolve around. But separate from that, or kind of, I guess, adjacent to that, it seems like there's so much to do in this game that are you going to be okay if players just don't end up really necessarily even paying much attention to the main story and just end up kind of doing their own thing out there, or are you taking kind of greater pains to make sure that people want to stay and get through that main path before they get back out to the wild space frontier?
It's a good question. I view our job as giving people the menu.
Yeah.
Here are the things you can do, and it's a very large game. Obviously, there's a lot to it. It can be complicated at times, and we have found though that the gaming audience, in particular our fans, they want to have all those options. And I do think more than anything we've done, I really believe this, that the more you give to Starfield, the more it comes back. And that was one of our goals. And so I do hope people play the main quest, and I hope people do this, but most of all, I want them ultimately to do whatever they want to do.
I know you don't want to give away a lot about the main storyline, certainly people don't want to have that spoiled for them, but what I would be curious of, given, again, the scale and scope of this, that the direct conveyed and that I barely scratched the surface of when I was playing a little while ago, of these 1,000 planets, of all this stuff you've got going on, how much of it will the main story lead you towards? Like, you know what I mean? Like, because you probably want to show as much of the diversity and as many of the cool places that your team worked really hard on over the course of the campaign, but you can't show everything. You can't lead them up to 1,000 different planets, right?
We want to keep it sort of, manageable. That's what I would say in the main quest. So we hit some high points, but not even, it's still a small fraction, like you're saying, to what's in the game. And for us, like a main quest, we want it to sort of pay off. There are people that do want to come to a game, do the main story, and feel that, okay, I've won. I can now do something else. I think that's okay too. But we've also learned, look, we're sitting here, it's 12 years after Skyrim. We're looking at a game that has over 60 million copies, and all these people playing it, they're still playing it. And so we have learned we need to build in from the beginning a game that has this long-term play thought of. So that hopefully people are playing Starfield a long time.
Well, on that note, you guys have always done post-release content. You've had like major paid, bigger expansions. You've had smaller scale stuff. I can't imagine that you'd even want to necessarily expand this game geographically moving forward, because there's already a ton there. So like, I know you're not here to just give away announce your post-release plan, but like conceptually, how are you thinking about it, given this is like a giant universe rather than just a continent like in Cyrodiil and in Elder Scrolls games?
Right, it's a great question. I mean, look, we're going to be doing a lot of add-on content for Starfield. We love doing it. Our fans love it. We will have announced sort of the first one that's going to, we're going to do a story expansion pack that's going to be coming. Our plan is to do things of varying sizes, and we've done a lot of that in our previous games. So it's something that we really like doing, our fans like. So despite the size of the game, there's still things we want to add as far as features in the future, or stories and things like that. So we think this is going to gain, hopefully, it's going to continue for a long time that way.
At the end of the direct, we heard from a bunch of folks on your team about their favorite moments that they've had while playing. Can you paint me a specific picture of a memorable moment for a character that you've rolled that you've been playing in recent months? Like some just memorably cool scenario.
Let's see, just a few weeks ago I landed on one of the early planets and this sandstorm blew through and I went to run away from it and this ship's been randomly, once they can randomly land, ships can land. So I'm going through the sandstorm, the ship landed and I get in this firefight and I got on the ship and while I'm shooting the guys on the surface of the planet, the ship took off into space. So now I'm in outer space on the ship and I was just like, I guess that happened.
One of my favorite moments from Oblivion, which I've told you many times is my favorite game of yours. That's the one that I have the most positive memories with. Was randomly finding a unicorn in the forest.
Yes, you can do that.
So, are there like 50 of those kinds of things
There's a
in
good
this
number.
game where there's
a
just
lot.
stuff that's not a quest, you'll just randomly happen upon this memorable special.
I don't want to spoil what they are, but yeah, of course, we love that stuff, and we have some really, really special ones in this game that I think I'm very curious to see how long after the game is out, that people discover it.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Skyrim and the tens and tens of millions of copies of that in the sort of historic runaway train that thing's been. I mean, you probably can't count on that level of success again necessarily. So what does success look like for you with this game?
That's a good question because with Game Pass, we're obviously going to be bringing in, probably the biggest audience that we've had for a launch. And so it just makes you really fortunate to know that you can take these kind of risks with a game like this and be ambitious, but still know that it's going to get in a lot of people's hands. So, I mean, I think for us it is that, people say they love the game. And I think all games go through a couple phases. Like you have this phase where the game isn't out yet. What do people think of it? And you're just like, what do they think of it the first weekend it's out? But then you got to think about what do they think after a year? What do they think after year two? And so I hope that, it sort of stands the test of time, like our other games. I don't focus on the number of users in that way.
I guess you can't really design for a game that will stand the test of time, right? You just have to do your best and hope that it works out.
That is very true. You do the absolute best that you can do. Again, the whole team is we have really poured ourselves in this one over a lot of years. And, you cross your fingers, you do everything you can. There are systems you can design. Say, hey, look, this system is going to work over a long-term play, hundreds of hours, like a character system, versus, after 30, you burn through everything. That's certainly not the case.
Clearly not, based on what I've seen so far. 1,000 planets number is the big one that you've been throwing out. What's the ratio of procedurally generated stuff to the handcrafted stuff?
Well, the planets themselves, the landscapes, pretty much all procedural. We kind of make these large, think kilometer-sized tiles we've generated, and those get kind of wrapped around the planet. As far as handcrafted content, more than any game we've done. I've stopped giving out numbers, but just in the dialogue, it's more than Skyrim and Fallout 4 combined, just in dialogue, right? So as we get into locations and art and everything, we've done more of it than we've ever done.
Wow. Is it reasonable to suggest that if Starfield is as awesome and successful as we all hope it is, that as gamers, is it reasonable to think that a Starfield 2 is 10 plus years away? Because the reason I bring this up, not to bring it back to how much time do we all have left, but you have always kept.
It's going to get depressing.
No, I hope not.
Okay.
But you've always kept your team clearly on purpose as one team. Bethesda Game Studios, your team, and you had been alternating between Elder Scrolls and then once you acquired it, Fallout, and you've gone back and forth. and now you've had this 8-year Starfield thing in here. You've already committed to Elder Scrolls 6 is the next thing. You said it's in pre-production. And then last year when we talked, you said, yep, Fallout 5, I want to do that, that'll be next.
That was more of like a general, it will clearly be after Elder Scrolls 6 at some point.
Okay,
That's
well,
like, let me clarify that one.
all right, go ahead.
At some point in the future.
But
Like Elder Scrolls 6 is the next one.
yeah, but if Starfield's awesome and you want to do another one, and the team wants to do another one, and the company wants another one, it sounds like it's probably going to be a while.
I don't have a great answer for you there. It's an astute observation.
I mean, I'm not trying to get you to unveil the roadmap. Like, I'm just because again, you've kept your team smaller. You've to date not like grown a second team within the studio, unless you have, and that's
Well, we have what I would call, a full-size group team on 76 still.
right.
Updating that game, it's doing great, very fortunate. But you're right in that we have gotten bigger. We have 4 studios. We have the one in Rockville, we have Montreal, we have Austin, and Dallas. So we have gotten bigger to handle all this. We work with a lot of partners on stuff. But that doesn't speed things up necessarily, right? You need a certain size. We're relatively small comparatively.
Right.
To do these things. And I think if we look at Skyrim, again, not the plan to have an Elder Scrolls 6 this far after Skyrim, but in today's day, people are playing these games for longer. So our ability, like we talked about, to support Starfield, whereas maybe in the old days you would put it out and then you'd go on to a sequel, now we can support that game for a much longer period of time, which is what our plan is. And then as we look to like an Elder Scrolls 6, that is one where like, I probably shouldn't say it, but if I do the math, I am not getting any younger. How long will people play an Elder Scrolls for? That may be the last one I do. I don't know.
Last Elder Scrolls.
The last Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know.
I mean, I do the math as a gamer. It's like, am I even going to be playing Elder Scrolls 6 on the Series X, or am I going to be playing that on the next thing? It's crazy how long the games that you make they take a long time.
I wish they did. I mean, I want them to be faster, but that speed isn't the goal.
Right.
Right.
Or should it
The
be?
goal is, hey, what's the product? What's the vision? How do we do this? And how do we continue to support the ones that we currently have? Because we have millions of people playing Fallout 4, millions playing 76, Skyrim. So it's about, hopefully have that with Starfield.
You had told me last year that you want to direct Fallout 5, like that you want that to be your game at some point down the road. But now with the Microsoft, Bethesda, Xbox Game Studios family getting a lot bigger, you did work with Obsidian years ago with New Vegas. Could any of the games that you and your team have created, any of these 3 franchises, would you make that? Would you want to work with any of them potentially on something in the future?
I mean, I can't say never to any of that. For us, it is what's going to get us the best product.
Yeah.
How do we stay focused? I think there's a lot of times where you can get unfocused and try to do too many things at once, and then they don't end up necessarily the way you want. And so if I look at other franchises or I look at entertainment in general, I haven't noticed like the time gap between things being a negative. Right? They can be a negative when you think about it and you make a calendar. Hey, when Starfield 2.
Look at Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly.
It suffered.
Or, the gaps between, I think Half-Life 3 will do fine, right? So, so even though in the moment, like how do I bring that closer to reality today? Because I want to play it. Those gaps, these are still evergreen franchises that I think when they come, it's about just doing it right.
Yeah. Well, that's what we as gamers want to hear too, certainly. So Starfield, I played an hour. It felt like 3 minutes. And you were like hustling me along with different save files, like go look at this, go look at this. What's the character you're playing now? Because you've got the traits, you've got the background. So like, what are you maining right now?
Well, I try to do it all. Right now, I'm digging deep on spaceships. So, I mean, you could say in some respects, this is like 5 or 6 games in one, right? It's the spaceship game, it's an on-the-ground game, it's just a dialogue game, it's an outpost game, it's a crafting game. It does all of these things, and it always is tricky for us to get a good game flow where those things don't feel like they're separate, that they can weave in and out of them in a way that is holistically creates something, greater than the sum of its parts.
What a view! It's a feast for the eyes. Off we go to another adventure.
To help contextualize Starfield for players, if they get a chance to play it themselves, what's the feeling that you try to give people with Elder Scrolls? What's the feeling that you try to give people with Fallout? And what's the feeling that you try to give players with this?
That's a good question. I would say if you think about, Elder Scrolls with a fantasy world, who would you want to be and what would you want to do? We want to provide that.
Yeah.
And then Fallout, the same thing in a post-apocalyptic environment. How does that factor into the things you find? And how does crafting is very unique in Fallout when it comes to that? Or what's the vibe of the people? What are they sacrificing to stay alive? And then when you get to Starfield and science fiction, same sort of thing where if you were to open it up and you could do anything, how are we providing that experience? And we love exploration, so when you get into a game like this, that's why people say, why do you have 1,000 hours? Because we'd rather give you the option